Hey, what's up guys? So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at Blackvue's new DR900X 2-channel dashcam. This is the successor to Blackvue's previous flagship, the DR900S, which is being discontinued in favor of the DR900X. Now, the new DR900X, it's not a radically new dashcam. This is more of an evolution of the previous version. And in this video, I'd like to talk about all the new changes and improvements, including the new improvements to the dashcam's cloud connectivity. We're going to take a look at the upgraded parking mode capability and the new wiring that's involved to do that, as well as the improved heat tolerances to help the dashcam function in hotter weather. Now, full disclosure, this is not a paid or sponsored review. I've never done those and I never will. This DR900X was sent to me by Blackvue for testing and review purposes, and I'm free to say whatever I want. And so as always, I'm going to go ahead and share exactly what I think, both good and bad. And then if you like what you'd see and you'd like to pick up a dashcam, down in the video description, I'm going to have some affiliate links to where you can go and purchase the dashcam, and using those links does support my channel. Plus, if you use the coupon code Vortex20, that will save you 5% off the price of the dashcam. Now, in terms of video quality, the DR900X is going to be exactly the same as what we had with the DR900S. So everything as far as resolution, viewing angle, codecs, bitrate, everything like that is going to be exactly the same. The DR900X is going to record at 4K up front, as well as 1080p if you get the optional rear dashcam. Blackvue was the first company to come out with a true 4K dashcam, and since then, some of the competition has come out with 4K dashcams, and I found in testing that those ones actually have better video quality than even the Blackvue, and for that reason, I really wish that Blackvue had improved the video quality, even though it also records at 4K, to kind of keep up with the competition. But again, here with the DR900X, it's exactly the same as what we had with the DR900S. Now, Blackvue's big focus is their cloud integration. They do the best connected dashcams, the best cloud dashcams out of anybody in the market, and this is what I really like about the Blackvue dashcams. I like the fact that in case maybe somebody hits your car while you're parked, you can get a notification directly to your phone letting you know that something happened, and then you're able to pull up the video footage in real time and see exactly what happened. The dashcam is also able to take that video clip and immediately upload it directly to the cloud, which is nice in case maybe somebody breaks into your car and steals the dashcam. That way you still have that video evidence to report to police. You're also able to remotely tap into the dashcam to do things like maybe change settings, as well as upgrade the firmware when new firmware updates are released to add new features or fix any bugs with the dashcam. And so having a connected dashcam is just going to really add to the convenience of adding a lot of nice functionality in addition to just recording while you're driving, as well as when you're parked. Now, there's a couple different versions available of this dashcam. Blackvue sells a single-channel version of the dashcam, which is designed to record just up front, as well as a 2-channel dashcam, which is designed to record both up front as well as in the rear. Additionally, they're not available yet, but Blackvue is also going to be releasing some infrared versions if you'd like a dashcam to mount on your windshield to record in the cabin, which is nice for maybe Uber and Lyft drivers. And they're also planning on releasing a truck version of the dashcam, which replaces the normal rear dashcam with an external waterproof version, so you can have it mounted externally on a truck. And in this video, I'm going to be taking a look at the Blackvue DR900X 2-channel. This is the traditional one with both the front and rear dash cam, designed to be mounted inside your vehicle to record both in the front and in the rear. Now, Blackvue is also releasing a DR900X, which is a lot like the DR900S, but it has all the same improvements here that we have with the DR900X. So with all that said, what are the improvements here with the new X series dashcam? Well, the first thing you'll notice when you take a look at the dashcam, you'll notice that the case itself has been redesigned. It's the same size as the DR900S, but it now has some additional vents built in to help it cool off in hotter weather. And this is really nice because the DR900S has previously had some issues with overheating in hotter weather and actually shutting off. Now, the temperature range of the previous DR900S could go from negative 20 degrees Celsius up to 70 degrees Celsius. Now with the DR900X, it can go up to 80 degrees Celsius. So 10 degrees hotter Celsius or 18 degrees hotter Fahrenheit. And this is specifically nice for those of you guys who, live in Arizona, Texas, Florida, basically hotter parts of the country. This dashcam is now able to manage at hotter temperatures. Now, when you look at the rear of the dashcam, you'll notice there's now a new LED available to let you know when you're connected to the cloud via LTE or via Wi-Fi. And there's some changes to the buttons, like how on the side of the dashcam, the Wi-Fi on-off button is now smaller and has been reshaped. Now, another big change with the dashcam is improved cloud connectivity. This is really what Blackvue is focusing on, especially because of the fact that there's a million different dashcams available in the market, and everybody's looking for something unique to make them special and different compared to everything else, right? Now, what Blackvue focuses on is having a connected dashcam, and this is something that's been improved here with the DR900X. Now, the dashcam still has Wi-Fi built in, in if you've got a Wi-Fi hotspot in your car, so the dashcam can connect to the cloud that way. But the new thing here is it now has a micro USB port on the side of the dashcam, which is designed to connect to a new connectivity module called the CM100 LTE. This is an optional $150 accessory, and it's basically a little box like this that's designed to plug directly into the side of the dashcam. You take a SIM card and you pop it into this CM100 LTE, and then it's going to go ahead and give an LTE connection to your dashcam so it can now connect directly out to the cloud. Now, having something like this plugged directly into the dashcam is going to be way easier than trying to get maybe a separate Wi-Fi hotspot, putting that in your car, making sure it automatically turns on when you start your car, and especially making sure that it's got power while you're parked, maybe hooking it up to batteries and things like that. Again, this is just designed to be something you plug directly into the dashcam, and the dashcam itself powers this. So as long as the dashcam is turned on when you're driving and as well as when you're parked, you're also now going to have all of your cloud connectivity as well. Now, this is going to be a different approach from something like the Blackvue DR900 LTE that has the LTE antennas built directly into the dashcam. The DR900X is going to be physically smaller, and it's not going to need the same level of cooling on the dashcam itself, which is going to be one of the benefits, but it is going to require you to purchase the optional LTE module externally. Now, when you're using the CM100 LTE, this does mean that you're now going to have a second cable that you're going to have to run up and tuck away somewhere. And it also means you're going to have one extra thing that you're going to have to unplug and plug back into the dashcam every time you want to pop out the memory card. So like the power cable itself, you're going to have to unplug the CM100 LTE every time you want to grab the memory card out of the dashcam if you're not going to be accessing the video files directly over the cloud instead. However, the main benefit is the fact that it's going to make it much easier to add LTE cloud support to your dashcam. Now, as far as which cell phone companies are compatible here with the CM100 LTE, here in the US, officially we've got AT&T and T-Mobile. In Canada, we've got Bell, TELUS, and Rogers. Now, I have heard some success with people using other providers like Verizon and Google Fi, for example, maybe taking those SIM cards and popping them into their Blackvue dashcams, and that does work, even though it's not officially supported. Now, pricing to get a data plan here for your CM100 LTE does vary depending on your provider as well as how much data you want. I find here in the US, the best option is going to be going with T-Mobile, and you don't have to even be a T-Mobile customer to do this. And with T-Mobile, I pay $10 a month for my data plan, and that gives me 2 gigs of the faster 4G LTE speeds. And then after I go through that, I've actually got unlimited 3G speeds available. So a little bit slower after the 2 gigs, but unlimited otherwise. Now, one nice thing here about the DR900X is, unlike the DR900S, because it has its own internet connection available, when you connect a device to the dashcam, such as maybe your phone is able to use the dashcam's internet connection, and so it's no longer going to break your phone's internet connection when you connect it to the dashcam if you want to run something like maybe Waze or Google Maps, for example. Now, the dashcam is only going to support one device connected to it. If you try to connect a second device, like a second phone, for example, you're not going to be able to connect the second phone, and the dashcam will actually error out and let you know that you can't connect a second device.
Direct Wi-Fi connection already in use.
So for that reason, if you want to connect multiple devices, say you have multiple phones, or maybe your passengers or your kids also want to connect to your Wi-Fi hotspot, if you want to connect maybe your radar detector, or even if you want to run multiple dash cams that all need their own internet connections, you're going to want a dedicated Wi-Fi hotspot, which is what I've done in my car, and that allows me to connect multiple devices simultaneously. But with the Blackvue DR900X, the internet connection that it's able to get is going to be designed just for the dash cam itself, as well as for one phone or device connected directly to the dash cam. Now, when it comes to adding things other than phones to the dash cam, there are some things that are compatible. Like, for example, I tried connecting the Escort Redline 360C to the DR900X over Wi-Fi, and that did work, with the caveat of you do need to set the dash cam itself to run at 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi. Plus, you need to first have your phone connected to the dash cam, and then when you tell the radar detector to connect to the dash cam, because the phone is still connected, it's going to error out on the dash cam.
Direct Wi-Fi connection already in use.
So you need to close out the app on Escort Live so that the radar detector can be the only device connected, and then that is going to work properly. I also tried hooking up a second DR900X to my first one with the CM100 LTE, and this can be nice if you want to have two separate dash cams running 4K both front and rear, or maybe you want to do a 4-channel setup, which is similar to what I do, to have dash cams running front, rear, left, and right. Unfortunately, though, this did not work well. I did find that the second dash cam is able to connect to the first one. However, it's then going to immediately disconnect, and it's not going to be able to maintain a connection while you're driving and allow the second dash cam to stay connected to the cloud when you need it. And so it can be a little hit or miss connecting additional devices, but I do find that things like maybe a phone or a radar detector works well. Either way, adding an LTE connection to the dash cam itself should work great. And this again is designed to give you the cloud capabilities for the dash cam when you're driving as well as when you're parked, assuming of course the dash cam has power while you're parked. And speaking of which, let's talk about the next improvement here with the DR900X, which is the voltage management and the cabling here for parking mode. Now, the new DR900X actually has voltage management built directly into the dash cam itself that you can go in and configure through the app. And this is really nice because it means you're no longer required to use an external voltage management device such as the PowerMagic Pro. Instead, you now have a new 3-wire power cable, so the dash cam can now tell when the car is turning on and off, and that's going to be the indication of when the dash cam switches between driving mode and parking mode. With the previous versions of the dash cams, it didn't have that type of power cable, and so instead it was relying on maybe the G sensor to tell when you're stationary and parked versus when you're moving and when you're driving. Now, I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of this implementation. I would find sometimes issues to where I would pull into my garage and it wouldn't properly switch into parking mode, and it would continue recording in driving mode and just start overriding a lot of my footage that I actually wanted. And so I really like having the ignition triggered parking mode instead. And I know some people really liked it if you're maybe sitting in traffic or maybe sitting at a toll booth to cross a border or something. It's nice that the dash cam knows, hey, you're stationary, you're not moving, but the car is still on, so please continue recording. So I really like this update. Now, one of the downsides though is they've changed the connector on the dash cam, and the connector is now a little bit smaller. And so if you want to run the DR900X, you're now going to need to run all new wiring here for the power cable if you're upgrading from something like a DR900S or a previous dash cam. Something that's nice though is the dash cam still does support the older G sensor method, and this is something that I really like as maybe a fallback method. And for example, on the cross-country road trip that I recently did, the moving truck, if I plugged the dash cam into the cigarette lighter for power, that power adapter was always hot even when the vehicle was off. And that made it really easy to run the dash cam not only when I'm driving, but also when I'm parked. And that way, if I had the moving truck parked overnight, the dash cam would continue to record while parked, and it would just use the G sensor to know to switch into the parking mode, even though I didn't have the newer, fancier power cable with the ignition triggered power source. Now that said, one of the downsides here of this new cable is Blackvue actually changed the connector here on the DR900X. It's a little bit smaller, and so it's not going to be compatible with any of the previous cabling from Blackvue's previous dash cams like the DR750S or 900S. And so for that reason, if you're wanting to upgrade from a previous older Blackvue dash cam, you're unfortunately going to have to run all new wiring here if switching over to the X series dash cams. If you try plugging in the older power cables into the DR900X, it unfortunately will not power on the newer dash cam. Now, some of the older accessories for the previous dash cams like the PowerMagic Pro and PowerMagic Easy, those are now being discontinued as well as they switch over to the 3-wire ignition power trigger source. Now, something to note, if you want to run the B124X battery pack, that normally comes with a cigarette lighter power adapter to plug the dash cam in, and if you use that, that's also going to rely on the older G sensor method. If you want to use instead the ignition triggered power source, there's a different cable that you need that doesn't come with the B124X. I'll link you to that down in the video description. It's the cable that's designed actually for the CellLink Neo, which is pretty much the same thing as the B124X, they're the same battery. And then if you use this cable with the 3-wired ignition triggered power cable that comes with the DR900X, if you hook that up, then you're going to be getting the ignition triggered power cable capability when you pair the DR900X with the Blackvue B124X battery pack. And again, down in the video description, I'm going to have links to all the different cables and accessories and batteries and all that kind of stuff for both US and Canada. So you'll find a bunch of links down there. Now, besides the power cable, all the other cables and mounts are going to be exactly the same. So if you're upgrading from maybe a previous Blackvue dashcam, you can pop out your old dashcam and slide your new one in its place. It also uses the exact same 1080p rear dashcam as what we had in the DR650S and DR750S. So the same rear camera mount, and even the same front to rear cable itself. You can reuse that. You're just going to be putting in a different front dashcam and a different power cable. Plus, if you're using any accessories like the circular polarizer polarizer, or the blend mount to attach the DR900X under your rearview mirror instead of attaching it directly to the windshield, those accessories are going to be compatible as well. It is kind of a bummer though that the power cable itself does need to be rerun if you're upgrading from a previous Blackvue dashcam. I really wish that you could just plug and play the power cable, but that's not the case here for those of you who want to upgrade. Now, speaking of upgrading, if you're wanting to upgrade from a previous 2-channel Blackvue dashcam and you want to get the newer 2-channel DR900X, make sure you get the DR900X 2-channel, not the single-channel one, even though you're going to be using the exact same rear camera and cabling. The reason is if you get the single version of the Blackvue dashcam, it's not going to have the port on the side to plug in the rear dashcam. You have to get the 2-channel dashcam to plug in the rear dash camera. That's another thing that I wish Blackvue had changed. I wish you could just buy the single-channel version of this dashcam and plug in your existing rear dashcam, but unfortunately that's not the case, and you also don't have the ability to maybe buy the single-channel version initially and then later on add the rear dashcam. You're going to have to basically buy the 2-channel version of the dashcam right out of the gate if you want the front and rear recording. Now, coming back to the overheating thing real quick, it's only 72 degrees out here right now, but it's starting to get hot in here. I'm starting to overheat and sweat, and my GoPro that I'm recording this video on just overheated and shut down on me. Like, it's definitely a thing that it gets hot inside a car, so I'm glad the Blackvue is working on the overheating stuff. And then the last thing that I wanted to quickly talk about here with the new DR900X is they've added Bluetooth here in the new dashcam. Now, this isn't something that's activated yet, even though the hardware is built into the dashcam. Now, as far as the first planned use for the Bluetooth capabilities, Blackvue says that they're planning on adding an electronic logging device to connect to the dashcam, and it sounds like this is going to be mostly for corporate people and for fleet services, not really so much for just the everyday driver. And then as far as any capabilities for just the average consumer, they don't say if they're planning on adding anything. I know when we first saw the dashcam back at SEMA 2019, they mentioned maybe using the Bluetooth to simplify the pairing process, but it doesn't look like currently there's any plans for that or for just anything for the average consumer. And speaking of SEMA, when I first heard of this dashcam, I was like, this is awesome. I've been running the DR900S ever since it came out, and there's a new version coming. Awesome. As soon as it comes out, I'll swap out the DR900S for the DR900X. But now that I'm learning about it, I'm not totally sure I'm going to wind up doing that. And on that note, let's talk about maybe the upgrade process. If you're wanting to just buy Blackvue's top-of-the-line flagship dashcam, yeah, this is the replacement to the DR900S, so it totally makes sense to just grab the DR900X. It's a better dashcam than the DR900S with the new improvements that it's adding. And so for that case, of course, get the new top-of-the-line one. Now, as far as whether or not it makes sense to upgrade, if you're upgrading from an older dashcam like the DR650S or the DR750S and you want the new 4K dashcam, totally get the DR900X. It's a nice bump to go to 4K. But what about for those of you who have the DR900S already and are like, well, should I upgrade to the DR900X? I think that maybe doesn't necessarily make as much sense unless you need some of the new features. Now, the biggest issue for me is there's not really any huge upgrades here with the DR900S, and that combined with the fact that it's going to be really tough to run the new cables that I need here. I'm like, I don't know if I necessarily want to do the upgrade. When I had the cables run for the DR900S, for example, I had my car pretty much stripped apart because I was adding a ton of new equipment to my vehicle. And when they were running the dash cam cables, it kind of tied everything up for additional protection. And for that reason, I don't really have a good way of uninstalling the previous cables and rerunning the new ones easily. I just did an install last week on my mom's Hyundai, and with that car, it was really easy to pop the panels off and tuck all the cables back behind. On my Audi here, I mean, the tolerances are all a lot tighter and it's not really easy to run the new cables, and so for that reason, I'm probably going to have to take it back to a professional, and probably when I get the USB Type-C cable run for Redenso Thea, at that point when I get that cable run, maybe it would make sense to go ahead and run the new cables for the DR900X, but until then, I think I'm going to be just fine running the DR900S. If Blackvue had made it so that I could pop out the old dash cam and pop in the new one and use all of the same wiring, including the power cable, sure, it would be a no-brainer to upgrade, but just with the difficulty of rerunning the power cable for me, it's just going to be really difficult for me to do. And then if you look at all the advantages, I mean, there's things like how, you know, I can get the new ignition-triggered power cable stuff. I would love that, but the G-sensor stuff is still working for the most part. The overheating stuff would definitely be nice, especially when it's hot like this, but Blackvue had previously released a firmware update for the DR900S, which raises the cutoff threshold with how hot the dash cam needs to get before it turns off. Before that, I did have some issues with the DR900S overheating and shutting off, but since then, I haven't had any overheating issues. But then again, I live in Seattle. I don't live in the southern part of the US or a place where it gets super hot, you know? There's also things like the CM100 LTE. It's not really a huge benefit for me. I've already taken the time to install a separate Wi-Fi hotspot in my car, and for that reason, I don't need the CM100 LTE. And, you know, that's going to give me connections for the 4 different dash cams I run in different angles. That lets me connect my radar detectors. It allows me to connect multiple phones, and I can't do all that stuff just with, you know, one CM100 LTE. So this is convenient just for a single dash cam, but I want to run multiple devices, so I don't really need the improved LTE connections that's available here on the new X series dash cams. I also find it kind of annoying to have to unplug the CM100 LTE every time I want to pop out the memory card, you know, just like I have to do with the power cable. And so it's just extra headache and steps for something that I don't personally necessarily need, you know? And so for that reason, I don't really see a compelling reason to upgrade, especially considering all the hassle of having to rerun the power cables. If you're, though, just installing from scratch, you don't have to worry about upgrading. Of course, go for the DR900X. Just go for the flagship, 4K front, 1080p rear, and all the LTE stuff. Awesome. That totally makes sense. If you're upgrading from maybe an older dash cam that records at 1080p and you want to step up to 4K, in that situation, totally makes sense. If you want some of the stuff like the improved high heat tolerance stuff or the new LTE capability stuff, totally upgrade, but it really kind of depends on your specific situation. If it makes sense for you to upgrade or you want to get the dash cam, again, I'll put links in the video description to where you can pick up the dash cams both for the US and for Canada. To save some money, you can use the coupon code Vortex20, which will save you 5% off the price of the dash cam. And I'm also going to have links to different accessories such as the different battery packs, to different memory cards that I would recommend to run with the dash cam, etc. You'll find all that information down in the video description below. And with that said, yeah, that's my thoughts here on Blackvue's new flagship, DR900X. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask down in the comment area below. Other than that, happy driving, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.